Hey guys, what's up? It's Savannah. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another true crime video. This is actually the last true crime video of 2020. It is crazy. I am taking a 2-week break from the true crime videos until 2021. I just need some time to step back from it, have a little bit of a mental break, and really focus in on my lifestyle videos again. So I think we're taking a break from the podcast. It's also a great time to take a break from the videos, but both the podcast and the true crime videos will be back in the very first week of 2021. You won't even feel like we left, honestly. But I will miss you very, very much. Thank you for sticking with me through 2020. I don't really even have the words to articulate it. Thank you so much for everything that you have given me in 2020 and for being the most constant and supportive people in my life. And I cannot thank you enough. I love you beyond belief and am indebted to you forever for the platform that you have given me. I never take it for granted and I never will. Thank you for being so invested in these cases. Yada, 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 yada. You get it. Now, before we get started into today's case, which mind you, I wanted to go out of 2020 with a bang, and let's just say we are doing that today. Before we get started, we do have a couple sponsors to go through, a little bit more than usual today. Just bear with me. And after that, we will get straight into the case. So with that being said, let's go ahead and quickly run through these sponsors. Up first, we have Feals CBD. Feals is premium CBD that gets delivered directly to your doorstep. What I love about Feals is that it is super, super easy to take. All you have to do is put a few drops of their CBD under your tongue and you will feel the difference within minutes. Now, Feals is actually a CBD membership service, so when you sign up, you will get CBD delivered to your doorstep every month. Feals has me feeling my best every day, and it can help you too. You can become a member today by going to feals.com/killer, and you'll get 50% off your first order with free shipping. That's feals.com/killer to become a member and get 50% automatically taken off your first order with free shipping. That's feals.com/killer. Solid gold. So did you guys know that up to 80% of the immune system is influenced by the gut, or that supporting the immune system through proper diet and digestive health enables pets to better fight environmental allergies? Solid gold is passionate about gut health because a healthy digestive system positively impacts the immune system and overall wellness of pets. Solid Gold's nutritional platform is inspired by their founding belief that high quality food is the best way to impact our pet's mind, body, and spirit. If you guys want to try out Solid Gold for yourself, you can do so and save 30% on select Solid Gold products by going to solidgoldpet.com/killer. Again, that is just solidgoldpet.com/killer to save 30% on select Solid Gold products. Remember, that is just solidgoldpet.com/killer. I want to talk to you guys about a new mini series from Wandery, and it's called Death of a Starlet. Death of a Starlet tells the tragic story of a small town girl turned Playboy playmate named Dorothy Stratton. Dorothy was the girl next door, a Playboy Playmate of the Year, and an emerging actor. But as she was on the verge of Hollywood stardom at 20 years old, Dorothy was gunned down at close range. So you guys can subscribe to Death of a Starlet on Apple Podcasts, or you can binge all 6 episodes right now and listen ad-free by joining Wandery Plus in the Wandery app. That is Wandery. Feel the story. So if you are new here, you are no stranger to me talking to you about BetterHelp. I've mentioned them a lot in the past, and if you have never heard of BetterHelp, BetterHelp is an online counseling service that provides you with professional counseling in the comfort of your own home. Once you sign up with BetterHelp, you will be matched with a professional counselor who is deemed to best fit your needs. However, if at any time you want to switch out this counselor for any reason, you will be able to do so at no additional charge. BetterHelp has counselors that specialize in anxiety, depression, grief, LGBTQ+ matters, relationships, family trauma, and more. Once you're connected with your counselor, you will be able to set up dedicated phone and video sessions with them, as well as have access to text them when you need it. BetterHelp is convenient, professional, and affordable. And if you guys want to try it out today, all you have to do is go to betterhelp.com/instant Instinct. Again, that is just betterhelp.com/instinct, and you will get 10% off your first month using BetterHelp. If you've never heard of Care Of is a wellness brand that makes it easy to maintain your health goals with a customized vitamin plan that helps you feel your best and support your long-term health goals. Care Of makes things completely hassle-free with their vitamins and supplements being delivered straight to your door. All you'll have to do is take Care Of's easy online quiz that helps you find the vitamins and powders that will support your specific health goals. The online quiz will ask you about your diet, your goals, and lifestyle so they can give you exactly what you're looking for. I personally loved taking the quiz. It was great to know that I'm going to be getting exactly what I'm looking for and not just guessing my way through the vitamin aisle. Care Of is focused on quality, science, and research that goes into each of their products. So if you guys want to try out Care Of today, you can get 50% off your first order of Care Of by going to takecareof.com and entering the code KILLER50. Again, that is just takecareof.com and entering the code KILLER50. So as you guys can tell by the title of today's episode, today we are talking about Katherine Knight. Now, if you have never heard of Katherine Knight, buckle up because this case is going to blow you away. Katherine Knight is the first woman ever in Australia to receive the sentence of life without the possibility of parole for charges you will soon hear. I do want to put a disclaimer because sometimes when we go over certain cases, you guys like the disclaimers. And the disclaimer for this case is that this case is not for the weak of stomachs, especially once we get to the end of it. So just putting the fair warning out now. And with that being said, let's jump into it. This is Katherine Mary Knight. She was born on October 24th, 1955 in Tenterfield, Australia, to her parents, Ken Knight and Barbara Rowan. Now, the story of Ken and Barbara is pretty interesting. Ken and Barbara had actually met while Barbara was married previously to Ken's co-worker, a man named Jack Rowan. So Barbara and Jack were married and living in the town of Aberdeen, which is located in New South Wales, with their 4 children. They had 4 sons together, Barbara and Jack, and their names were Patrick, Martin, Neville, and Barry. And once Barbara and Ken began to have their affair, word started spreading really fast throughout the town, and in order to get away from the gossip of it all and really start a new life together, Ken and Barbara actually moved away, and they moved to a different town called Moree. And Moree is about a 4-hour and 10-minute drive from Aberdeen. So the two of them were relocating a pretty decent amount away to start their new life. And when it came to Barbara's 4 children that she previously had with Jack, and the 2 youngest ended up moving in with their aunt who lived in Sydney, Australia. Now, when Barbara and Ken relocated, they ended up having children of their own. And these children included a set of twin girls named Joy and Catherine. Catherine was the younger twin out of her and Joy. She was born a half-hour after her. And in 1959, when Catherine was only 4 years old, Barbara's first husband, Jack, actually passed away. And once he passed away, the 2 eldest boys, which were Barbara's biological children, moved in with her and Ken. So now it was Barbara, Ken, Joy, Catherine, their other brother, as well as the 2 boys. So it really was one big blended family. You had about 5 kids in the house with Barbara and Ken. And I want to talk about Ken for a minute. So Ken was known to be a pretty intense alcoholic, and he was also known to abuse his wife Barbara as well. He would physically abuse her and sexually abuse her. And on certain days, he would even rape her up to 10 times a day. Now, because of this and because of the abuse that Barbara was enduring, she ended up being very vocal to her daughters in particular about this abuse. And she would tell Barbara and Joy all of the time how terrible men were and how terrible sex was, and really painted a negative connotation just based off of her experiences. And later on in life, Katherine had actually said that her mother had told her that if a man ever tried to make a sexual advance at her or tried to have sex with her and Katherine didn't want to shut up and stop complaining, essentially, which is terrible advice. Now, Katherine has said that even though Ken had abused her mother, Ken had never abused her, at least sexually. So she said she never received any sexual abuse from Ken. However, Katherine did state that she was sexually abused by members of her family that she has not named up until she was about 11 years old. However, those family members' names have never been disclosed. So by the time Katherine got to high school, her behavior really became a problem. She started to act out very violently, and she was described by her classmates and the people that knew her as a bully who would stand over small children. There was one instance where Katherine physically assaulted a boy at her school. However, during the times that Katherine was not acting out at school, she was actually said to be a great student and often received awards for her good behavior, which I know extremely contradicts everything that I just told you about her assaulting a boy at school and being described as a bully. However, she did receive these awards for good behavior. Now, when Katherine was 15 years old, she ended up dropping out of high school and she got her first job as a cutter in a clothing factory. And a cutter basically sounds like exactly what it is. They're the person that cuts up clothes for the clothing manufacturer in a factory. And after about a year of working for this clothing factory, Katherine ended up getting promoted. And once she got promoted, her job gifted her with a promotion gift, which was a set of butcher knives. And when Katherine received these knives, she was so excited about it, and she took the knives home and she actually ended up hanging them above her bed, like right above her bed. And this was a habit that she continued throughout every house that she lived in. And she said the reason that she did this was so that they would always be there if she needed them. So now that we've talked about Katherine's early life and her early years, let's talk about her first real relationship, which ultimately was her first marriage, to a man named David Collette. In 1973, Katherine met a 22-year-old man named David Collette, who at the time was actually friends with Katherine's brother. And as far as David's life goes, before meeting Katherine, David had witnessed some pretty traumatic events himself. David had previously worked in railway operations, and while on the job one day, David's best friend was actually killed right in front of him. David had also been at the scene of a horrific school bus crash that resulted in the death of 6 children, and he was actually the one on the scene who was helping remove some of the bodies from the school bus. So as a result of these 2 traumatic events in his life, David really did turn to alcohol, and he would drink all of the time. And he was drinking so much and it was affecting him so heavily that he actually ended up losing his job because of it. Katherine and David ended up getting married in 1974 when Katherine was only 19 years old, and on the day of their wedding, the two of them arrived to their service on a motorcycle while David was heavily intoxicated. However, regardless of how intoxicated he was, David said he always remembered the piece of advice that Katherine's own mother gave to him. Now, according to David, Barbara, Katherine's mother, told David, quote, "You better watch this one or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do the wrong thing and you're fucked. Don't ever think of playing up on her. She'll fucking kill you." End quote. Barbara was saying this about her own daughter to the man that her daughter was about to marry. Just let that sink in. Can you imagine getting married and your husband or wife or whoever's parent comes to you and tells you that about their own child? Very telling. But Barbara wasn't very far off, because on their wedding night, Katherine had actually attempted to strangle David to death because he, and I quote, only had sex with her 3 times. Only. She was upset that he only would sleep with her 3 times on their wedding night, and because of this, she attempted to strangle him. And this really just was the beginning of the downward spiral that was David and Katherine's marriage. Before the birth of their first daughter, Melissa, in May 1976, there was another incident where Katherine had struck David over the back of the head with a frying pan after he came home late from a darts competition that he had made the finals in. David fled the scene before collapsing into a neighbor's front yard, and he was treated for a fractured skull. Now, the authorities did want to press charges on Katherine for this. However, Katherine was able to convince David to not press any charges against her. But even though he didn't press any charges, David was kind of just done with their relationship relationship in general. He didn't want to be with Katherine anymore, and he was over the violence and over enduring all of this abuse that Katherine was putting on him. So he ended up leaving Katherine for another woman shortly after their daughter was born. He moved to Queensland and he started a whole new life there. And on the day that David had actually left Katherine, Katherine was seen with Melissa in a stroller taking her for a walk, and she was seen violently swaying the stroller from side to side on the sidewalk. And because of this, she was admitted to the St. Elmo's Hospital, where she was diagnosed with postnatal depression and spent the next several weeks recovering from this. However, after the several-week treatment, Katherine then took Melissa and placed her on train tracks. She placed her daughter on train tracks and left her there. And after she left Melissa on the train tracks, she went out and actually stole an axe and ran into town and started threatening to murder people with this axe. Now, luckily, when it came to Melissa, there was actually a man nearby who saw her and ran over and grabbed her. And it was said that the train was just minutes away. So had this man seen her just a couple minutes later, Melissa probably would not have survived this. However, luckily, because of the timing, she was able to survive. However, because Katherine ran into the town with an axe trying to kill people, she was arrested for this and placed back into the same St. Elmo's Hospital, where she just signed herself out the next day. So she literally just stayed there a day for stealing an axe, threatening to kill people, and attempting to murder her own daughter, but she just signed herself out the next day. Now, after being released from the hospital, Katherine made it her mission to go out and find David, her husband that had left her. She knew that he was living in Queensland and started a whole new life there, and because she couldn't drive, Katherine actually went out and found an innocent woman who could drive and ended up slashing her face with a knife and told her that she had to drive Katherine to Queensland and threatened to kill her if she did not. So ultimately, this woman agreed, not necessarily agreed with what was happening, but just agreed so she wouldn't get killed and to save her own life. She put Katherine in the car with her, and the two of them began driving to Queensland. However, this woman was actually very smart because she actually ended up pulling over to a service station and was able to run away from Katherine and went up to the employees at the service station and told them to contact the authorities. And when Katherine got word that the authorities were coming, instead of surrendering or running away or driving the car away, Katherine actually took hostage a young boy who was walking around the service center. She took him hostage and threatened to kill him, and by the time authorities showed up, luckily they were able to convince her to let the boy go, which she ultimately did, and Katherine was arrested and she was sent to the Morisset Psychiatric Hospital. And this is where she disclosed to several of the nurses that worked there that her plan was actually to murder one of the employees at the service station that they had stopped at, because that employee had repaired David's car, which in turn gave him a vehicle to leave her. She also told the nurse that after she planned on killing the service worker, her plan was to go to Queensland to kill David and his mother as well. And so once Katherine disclosed this information to these nurses, the authorities actually told David this, just to give him the heads up that his life was potentially in danger, that Katherine was threatening to kill him. And what's crazy is that instead of, running away or relocating or moving, David and his mother actually moved back to Aberdeen in order to help take care of Katherine and restart their life together. So once Katherine was released from the psychiatric hospital, David and his mother were waiting for Katherine, and the two of them just began their life together again like everything was normal. They never got a divorce, so they still were married, and they just continued on their life together. On August 9th, 1976, Katherine was released from the hospital, and the three of them ended up moving to Woodridge, which is located in Brisbane. And while they were there, the two of them had their second daughter on March 6th, 1980, named Natasha Marie. And then just 4 years later, in 1984, Katherine actually ended up leaving David. She left David and moved back to her parents' house located in Aberdeen. And then the following year, she actually injured her back, so she was able to get disability pension from the government. And the government also gave her housing as well. So she was able to get her own house in Aberdeen through the government pension. And that was kind of the end of her relationship with David. So all in all, it lasted a little over 10 years from 1973 to 1984. However, after 1984, that chapter of her life with David was closed, and she moved on to be in a relationship with a different man who was also named David. However, this man's name is David Saunders. At the time that Katherine met David, it was 1986, and he was a 38-year-old minor, and their relationship moved pretty quickly. Only a couple months after they started dating, David ended up moving in with Katherine and her 2 daughters. And while he technically had all his belongings there with Katherine, and for all things considered, he was moved in with her, he still ended up keeping his apartment that he had previously before he ever met Katherine. And this ended up serving him well, because Katherine would get very jealous, but more so paranoid at the idea that David would have an affair. So she would kick him out of her house constantly. It was this tumultuous cycle where Katherine and David would get into this argument, and then Katherine would kick David out of the house, and David would go back to his apartment, and then he would come back, they would make up, and it was this constant cycle that they went through. And in May of 1987, David actually had this 2-month-old puppy, and Katherine slit this puppy's throat in front of David and told him that if he was ever to cheat on her, that is what would happen to him. She would slit his throat as well. Katherine literally slit a 2-month-old dog's throat in front of David. And that wasn't it, because after she slit the dog's throat, she went right over to him and hit him over the head with a frying pan. Now, David and Katherine ended up having their own daughter together, who was born in June 1988, that they named Sarah. And once Sarah was born, David and Katherine purchased a house together, and Katherine had some pretty interesting interior design decorations. She was said to have decorated the house through and through with animal skins, skulls, machetes, rakes, pitchforks, horns, and animal traps, which is not necessarily the most endearing and homey type of decor. And it was said by the people who visited her house that no space in Katherine's home was left uncovered from these things, and that even included the ceilings. Sorry for the switch up, I'm just trying to escape the sun right now. Now, the straw that really broke the camel's back in David and Katherine's relationship was an argument that they had that led to Katherine actually hitting David in the face with an iron, a clothing iron. And after she did that, she ended up stabbing him in the stomach with a pair of scissors. And after this fight, David ended up moving out of the house, leaving his daughter with Katherine and her sisters. And on the day that David went to retrieve all of his belongings, he found that Katherine had literally cut up all of his clothes. So she cut up every single piece of clothing that he owned. And because of this, David started to actually get scared for his life, and he went into hiding. However, going into hiding didn't stop Katherine from trying to find David. So she did attempt to find him on several different occasions. However, the people who knew where David was refused to tell Katherine where he was located, and would just say that they didn't know where he was at all, which in turn just made her more angry. And so on the day that David went to go visit his daughter, he discovered that Katherine had put out an AVO order against him, which is basically, if you're unfamiliar, a domestic violence order that you can put out on someone so they stay away from you. And what's so ironic is that Katherine put out this order against David, claiming that he was the one who was abusing her. And going to visit his daughter is when David found out about this. And that really is the end of the David Saunders chapter in Katherine's case. So now we move on to the 1990s. And this is when Katherine meets a man named John Chillingworth. And their relationship lasted for about 3 years, and they did end up having a child together. They had a son named Eric. And after the 3 years of their relationship, it actually ended because Katherine had an affair with a different man named John. I know it's a little weird. It's like David, John, and now John. She had an affair with a different man named John Price. Now this is John Price. John Charles Thomas Price was born on April 4th, 1955. He was the father of 3 children and was described as the type of guy that everyone liked. John's previous marriage had ended in 1988, and it resulted in his daughter living with his ex-wife while his 2 other children lived with him. Katherine actually moved. Now, after the 2 of them began dating, Katherine actually moved in with John into his house in 1995, and when they moved in together, John was very aware of Katherine's violent past. However, he just didn't seem to mind. It didn't bother him too much. He still let her move into his house with him. And in the beginning of their relationship, life seemed to be going very well for them. John was incredibly successful at his job and making a lot of money. John's children loved Katherine and they had a great relationship. For all things considered, and for Katherine's past considered, everything seemed to be going relatively normal. However, the first known problem occurred for Katherine and John in 1998 when John revealed to Katherine that he did not want to marry her. So he refused to marry Katherine, and this in turn made Katherine very angry. Once Katherine found this out from John, and once this was a steady argument that they were having, Katherine actually went as far as spiting John so much that she ended up getting him fired from the job that he had worked at for 17 years. And how she did this was she actually sent John's boss video footage of John stealing from his work. And what he was stealing was just outdated medical kits. They were literally expired and outdated medical kits. However, stealing is stealing and it really didn't matter. So because of this, John's boss had no choice but to fire him. And obviously once this happened, John was infuriated. He had this job for 17 years. No, he shouldn't have been stealing, but now the woman that he's in a relationship with is now turning him into his boss. So it was just this whole ordeal, and it caused John and Katherine to ultimately break up. So he kicked her back out of his house and she ended up moving back home to Aberdeen. However, just several months later, they ended up rekindling their romance and the 2 of them started dating again. But John did not let Katherine move in with him this time. So the 2 of them were dating, but they weren't living together. But again, Katherine not being able to live with John only perpetuated more arguments between the 2 of them. Katherine, if you haven't noticed already, she's a very dominant person. She's a dominant woman. It's her way or the highway, and she doesn't like being told no. And when she does get told no, she will violently react. So now we move to February of the year 2000, and it's kind of crazy to think that this only happened 20 years ago. I know it kind of seems like a long time, but just with the severity of everything that we're about to talk about, I feel like these are crimes that when you do hear of them happening, they happened like 50 to 80 years ago, not just like 20 years ago in the year 2000 when I was like 3 years old. You know, it just doesn't seem like that. Now, starting in February of the year 2000, this is when the first notable physical attack of John happened from Katherine. In February of the year 2000, Katherine actually stabbed John in the stomach. However, the stab was not fatal and he ultimately was okay. However, he did end up filing a restraining order against Katherine. He filed the restraining order on the morning of February 29th on his way to work. It was a leap year that year, so that is why it's February 29th. And he filed this restraining order in hopes that Katherine would stay away from him and his children. And when John went into work that day, he actually talked to his coworkers about his situation, and he actually told his coworkers that if he did not come to work the next morning, it is because Katherine killed him. And obviously when his coworkers heard a statement like that, they really tried to convince him to not go home that night and not be there. However, he said that because his kids were there, he was afraid that Katherine was going to hurt them if he wasn't there in order to spite him. So he said he had to go home. At this point, Katherine was unpredictable, and it was obvious that he was very afraid for his life and feared what Katherine would do. However, he also knew that it wasn't just him involved, it was his children too. do, so he had to go home and protect them. He couldn't just leave. Now, when John got home on the night of February 29th, he was actually very surprised to see that neither Katherine nor his children were there. And the reason for this is because Katherine had actually sent all of the children off to friends' houses to have sleepovers. However, with Katherine not being there, John didn't think too much of it. He thought that he was good to go for the night. All of the kids were at their friends' houses. Katherine wasn't there. He thought he was going to have, for all things considered, a relatively normal night. And this night did include him spending time at his neighbor's house, and then he did end up coming back to his house at about 11 o'clock p.m. and he went to bed. Now, sometime in the middle of the night, and I don't know if it's because she had a key or if the door was unlocked, but at some time during the middle of the night, Katherine did come in to John's home. Now, when she got into the home, she said she sat on the couch and watched some TV before jumping in the shower, and after she got out of the shower, she woke John up and the two of them slept together. And after they slept together, John went back to bed. The next day, at about 6 o'clock a.m., John's neighbor noticed that John's car was still in the driveway, which was unusual for him because his usual work hours required him to leave his house before that time. So the neighbor knew that something was a little off. So once she saw that, she decided to call his work and tell his work that his car was still in his driveway. And because of the conversation that his coworkers had had with him the day prior, his coworkers were sent to his house to try and see if everything was okay, basically to do a welfare check, but they aren't the police. So his coworkers go to his house, and the neighbor as well as the coworker starts knocking on the door, and when they do this, they notice that there is a little bit of blood residue on the front door. And when they notice this, they decide to contact the authorities. So the neighbor and the coworker call the authorities, who then arrive at the house at about 8 o'clock p.m. And after making their presence known and after knocking on the door and getting no response, the authorities entered the house through the back door. And when they did this, they discovered John's mutilated body lying on the floor. Now, as far as Katherine goes, she was also in the house. However, she had taken a lot of pills, so she was kind of in just this whacked out trance and just wasn't fully there, but she was physically in the house at the time. Katherine had stabbed John 37 times in the front and back of his body. But let's discuss the details, and I'm going to warn you again, this is where it gets gruesome. The medical examiners have put together a timeline that states that Katherine started stabbing John while he was asleep after the two of them had slept together. Once she started stabbing him, John was obviously woken up from him being stabbed, and he started running away from Katherine and was running all throughout the house in hopes to escape from her. However, she continued to chase him down, continued to stab him, and at one point, the medical examiners believe that John was able to get out of the house, and this is why there's blood residue on the front door, is because he was able to get out of the house. However, they believe he either fell or he tripped, and then Katherine dragged his body back into the house, stabbed him multiple times, and let him bleed out on the floor. In total, again, he was stabbed 37 times. There were bloody handprints all over the house. It told police that John was in fact trying to run away from Katherine and using the walls as almost like a balance to try and stay up because he was so badly injured. And once John was confirmed to be dead, Katherine actually left the house and went to an ATM in Aberdeen and took out $1,000 in cash, and then she returned back to the home several hours after the murder. And at this time is when it is believed that Katherine skinned John's body. And she just didn't skin parts of his body, she skinned his entire body, and she was able to do so in one piece. She was able to skin his entire body in one piece. And the reason authorities figured that out is because his entire skin was hooked onto a meat hook in one of the rooms of the house. I believe it was just like the living room. They called it the lounge room. But it was said that his feet, the skin of his feet were dangling on the floor, and his entire skin was hooked onto this meat hook. And I don't mean to say luckily, as you know, I don't mean to say luckily in the way that this might come off, but luckily the autopsy did reveal that John was already completely dead at the time of the skinning. So he didn't feel anything. He wasn't alive to feel this torture that he was put through. But skinning him wasn't the only thing that Katherine did, because after she skinned him, Katherine then decapitated John. And this was a 40-minute process of a decapitation. This is where you gotta wonder. You gotta wonder. Not only did she decapitate him, but she cut up other parts of his body and cooked them. She cooked his body parts. And not only did she cook his body parts, she prepared a full course meal with his body parts. This full course meal included a baked potato, pumpkin, beetroot, zucchini, yellow squash, cabbage, and gravy. And Katherine made multiple plates. She actually made 3 plates. One of the plates was found in the backyard, and it is believed that she herself tried to eat it, however couldn't, because it was literally John's remains. And the other 2 plates were found at the dinner table, and the 2 plates were found with placemats, place settings, the plates themselves with all of the items on it, and they had 2 name tags on these place settings. And the 2 name tags, and on these name tags were the 2 names of John's children. Katherine had prepared to literally serve John's children their own father for dinner. She prepared to serve his children their own father's remains without them even knowing it. They were going to eat this without knowing that this was their father. Now, luckily, obviously, the police got there before anything could happen and before the children got home from school. That way they didn't have to see any of this. However, just the fact that this was what was happening is unbelievable. At the scene, authorities also found a note written by Katherine that was placed on top of a picture of John, and I'm gonna look over here so I can read it. The note said, quote, "Time got you back, Jonathan, for raping my daughter. You to Beck for Ross, for little John, now playing with little John's dick, John Price." End quote. And just for clarification, Beck is the name of John Price's daughter. But when it comes to Jonathan for raping my daughter, those allegations have been proven to be not true. So even though that was said in the note, it was not true. So obviously Katherine was arrested. She was arrested for this, and she initially offered to plead guilty for manslaughter, which is a joke. It is such a joke. And obviously this plea was rejected for so many reasons. She was arraigned on March 2nd for the charge of murdering John Price, which she entered a not guilty plea for. And her trial began on October 15th, 2001. And the crime scene photos were actually so graphic in this case that the judge actually gave the jurors the option of being excused during the showing of the photos because of how horrific they were. Police officers who were on the scene of the crime that day have said, quote, "It's an image I'm still trying to come to grips with to this day," end quote. And this is even years after the crime had ever occurred. And Katherine was declared sane and was fit to sit trial, and her defense was going to argue that she had amnesia and that was the cause of all of this. But I also want to mention that Katherine did go under an evaluation by 2 different psychiatrists who did say that Katherine suffered from borderline personality disorder as well. But then just days after the trial started, Katherine actually pled guilty to murdering John Price. She pled guilty for this. However, even though she pled guilty, she refused to take any responsibility. So she was really just pleading guilty to just get this over with, and she refused to accept that she actually did this. At the sentencing, Katherine's lawyers actually requested that Katherine be excused to avoid hearing some of the facts of this case. So basically being excused from hearing the facts of the case and the crime that she committed, which the judge did not allow. And when Katherine was sitting there at the sentencing, hearing what had happened and hearing the facts of the case, when it got to the part about the skinning and the decapitation of John Price, Katherine completely bursted out into hysterics. She started screaming and crying, and she actually had to be sedated in the courtroom. However, regardless of this trial, and once it was all said and done, Katherine Knight was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, and the judge actually placed on Katherine's case file a note that said, to never be released, which just goes to show the extremity of this crime and how horrific it was. Obviously, when hearing it, it's mind-blowing that this is actually a thing that happened just 20 years ago. It's absolutely insane. Katherine is in prison right now, and she will be there for the rest of her life. And she's still alive to this day. She's in prison. She has not passed away yet, and she'll be in prison for the rest of her life. And like I said, she was Australia's first woman to ever be charged with life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. So that is the case of Katherine Knight. It is a crazy one. It is intense. It is twisted. It is repulsive. There's so many different things that are going on here, but I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So with that being said, you guys, that is it for me today. Thank you so much for tuning into the last episode of 2020. I will be back in a couple days with a lifestyle video, and I will be back in the beginning of 2021 with another true crime video. Thank you guys so much for making 2020 a livable year. Bye guys.